The Glass Fortress. She was immune to everything, except the one woman who could shatter her. Chapter 1. The Fortress of Silence. She wasn't an alpha. She was the standard the rest failed to reach. The one omegas softened for without understanding why. The one betas stepped around without being told. The one other alphas studied, admired, and, in quieter corners, resented. Iridia Dondarrion did not raise her voice to command a room. She entered it, and the room corrected itself. But there was something no one knew. Not the board. Not her staff. Not the city that built its ambitions around her name. Iridia Dondarrion was immune. Omega pheromones, the very thing that bent the world's hierarchy into shape, slid off her like rain on sealed glass. And if one ever managed to breach that invisible barrier, the reaction was immediate. Violent. Her body rejected it outright, nausea curling sharp and unforgiving beneath her ribs. It was not a quirk. Not a preference. Not a choice. It was a defect written into her very DNA. And it had cost her everything she was never allowed to want. The secret had been buried with precision, layered under years of discipline and distance. Only one other person had ever known. Her mother. Catherine Dondarrion had once stood at the center of empires with the same effortless command her daughter now carried. Sharp. Untouchable. Unyielding. Now, she lived in a quiet assisted care facility at the edge of the city. Most days, she did not remember her own name. But every day, at exactly 3 o'clock, something in her mind aligned. A window opened. 15 minutes of clarity. 15 minutes where Catherine Dondarrion returned. And in those 15 minutes, she remembered her daughter. So, Iridia built her life around that time. Iridia adapted. Where others built lives, she built systems. Where others chased connection, she engineered distance. AlphaCore was not just a company. It was an extension of her control. A conglomerate carved from precision and ruthlessness, where deals did not dip below billions and influence stretched far beyond Kasiran's borders. In the city of the First Ark, proximity to AlphaCore was currency. Association was power. And at the highest edge of that power, overlooking the valley like a silent observer, stood her home. A structure of glass and intention. Floor-to-ceiling panels wrapped the mansion in seamless transparency, offering a full view of the city below. Reinforced, unbreakable, engineered to withstand force that would level lesser structures. But the strength of the glass was never the point. Glass did not carry scent. Inside, Iridia saw everything. Outside, nothing reached her. It was not a home. It was filtration. It was control. It was survival. The boardroom held 12 alphas. Individually, they were powerhouses. Together, they were a force capable of shifting economies and destabilizing regions. And yet, the room was quiet. Not respectful. Measured. Agar Pike broke the silence first, his voice smooth, deliberate. Silver threaded through his hair, his tailored suit as precise as the man himself. There have been incidents, he said. Escalating. Marn Gould leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled. Northern intelligence suggests it's disorganized. Stray groups. Opportunistic. No one spoke after that. They were waiting. Iridia stood at the far end of the room, framed by glass and skyline. Her back was straight, arms folded behind her, her reflection faint against the city she owned more thoroughly than anyone would dare say aloud. She did not turn immediately. She let the silence stretch. Let it settle into them. Then, slowly, she moved. Every gaze followed. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady, untouched by urgency. Increase security across all divisions. A pause. Precise. Final. I want a full report by close of business. No questions followed. There never were. Her attention shifted, not to the alphas, but to the clock above the boardroom door. 2:50. Right on time. She reached for the leather-bound folder on the table. The movement was enough. Chairs slid back in unison. 12 Alphas stood. Not out of courtesy. Out of instinct. They filed out in silence, their presence dissolving into the corridor beyond as Omegas moved in to collect documents, heads lowered, movements efficient and careful. No one lingered. No one ever did. The hallway parted for her. Betas pressed themselves subtly against the walls. Omegas avoided even the suggestion of proximity. It was not fear in its loudest form. It was something quieter. Something learned. Erida walked through it without looking. Her assistant rose as she approached, but Eridia didn't break stride. She placed the folder down with quiet precision and continued into her office. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. Cool air. Filtered. Controlled. Exactly as it should be. She crossed the room and stood by her desk, her gaze flicking once more to the clock. 2:59. Her body stilled. A breath, measured and slow. At exactly 3 o'clock, the phone rang. It always did. She answered on the first tone. Mother. How are you? Catherine Dondarian's voice flowed through the line, warm, steady, untouched by time or distance. Eridia, my darling. I'm well. Tell me, when are you coming to visit an old woman? Eridia closed her eyes for the briefest moment, something unreadable passing through her expression before it vanished completely. The conversation unfolded as it always did. Gentle inquiries. Familiar rhythms. When would she visit? When would she choose a mate? When would she finally allow herself a life beyond empire? And Eridia, precise even in this, gave the same answer she always did. Soon, mother. Soon. 15 minutes. Not a second more. Not a second less. When the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier. Not empty. Just aware. Eridia placed the phone back down and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned, the fortress settling back into place around her. Untouched. Unshaken. Unbreakable. Or so the world believed. Chapter 2. The Garden of Ghosts. The car rolled to a slow stop in front of the house. It stood quietly at the edge of the street, a brownstone worn by time and softened by neglect. Ivy clung where it pleased. The garden had long since forgotten discipline. Windows stared outward, dim with dust and memory. Avaya Reeve stepped out, her suitcase following with a soft thud against the pavement. For a moment, she just stood there, taking it in. The silence wasn't empty. It felt patient. A slow smile curved her lips. New beginnings, she murmured, more promise than statement. The key resisted her at first. Of course it did. Time had settled into the lock like a stubborn old tenant. But with a gentle insistence, it turned. The door groaned open, the sound echoing deeper than it should have, as if the house itself was stretching awake. Dust greeted her. Old paper. Faded wood. Something faintly sweet beneath it all. Home. Avaya stepped inside and closed the door behind her, sealing herself into a space that had once known her and somehow still did. Kasiran. She hadn't spoken the name out loud in years. She had been 2 when her parents left the city behind, pulled back into family obligations elsewhere. Life had unfolded far from here. Different skies. Different rhythms. And then, absence. A year ago, both her parents were gone. The world had gone quiet in a way she couldn't quite outrun. So, she came back. Not out of obligation. Not even out of grief. But because something in her had turned, slowly, insistently, pointing here. Back to this house. Back to this city. Back to something unfinished. She pulled the sheet from the nearest piece of furniture, sending a cloud of dust spiraling into the light. Sunbeams cut through the room, illuminating drifting particles like suspended time. Avaya laughed softly, brushing her hands together. All right. I see how it is. She pushed her suitcase to the corner and rolled up her sleeves. Windows were thrown open one by one, each groaning in protest before surrendering. Fresh air rushed in, chasing out the stale quiet. Curtains were pulled back. Surfaces wiped down. Forgotten corners brought back into the present. Music played softly from her phone, something light, something familiar. And Avaya sang along. Not perfectly. Not carefully. Just freely. The house responded. Or maybe it was just the way it felt. Each room seemed to breathe a little easier as she moved through it. The weight lifted, inch by inch, replaced with warmth and motion and the gentle insistence of life returning. By the time she stepped back into the lounge, hands on her hips, the space looked less like a memory and more like a beginning. Her gaze drifted outward. To the garden. It had surrendered completely. Roses tangled with wild growth, their thorns caught in creeping ivy that had claimed far more than its share. Weeds stretched unapologetically toward the sun. The lawn had lost its softness, replaced with stubborn patches of uneven green. Avaya exhaled, long and dramatic. Her back already protested in anticipation. Still, she smiled. Mama loved her roses, she said softly. And the grass. Her eyes flickered with something brighter. The grass is for midnight dancing. Decision made. She stepped outside. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun shifted slowly overhead, painting the sky in softer hues as the day wore on. Avaya worked through it all, hands in the soil, fingers catching on thorns, strands of hair escaping whatever order she'd tried to impose that morning. The old lawnmower complained loudly when she dragged it out, as if offended by the sudden expectation of usefulness. She ignored it. The ivy was coaxed back. The roses freed, one careful movement at a time. Space reclaimed. Breath restored. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive again. By the time she finally leaned back on her hands, the sky had begun its descent into gold and amber. Her muscles ached in quiet protest, her dress clung lightly to her skin, and her bare feet were dusted with earth. She tipped her head back, eyes tracing the endless stretch above her. "Isn't this better?" she asked the sky, the house, the ghosts that might still linger. Her voice drifted upward, light and unguarded. And then the sprinkler system sputtered. Once, twice, then sprang to life. Avaya startled, then laughed as the first arc of water caught her mid-rise, soaking through her sundress in seconds. She could have stepped away. She didn't. Instead, she spun. Bare feet pressing into the softened earth, arms outstretched as water traced over her skin, her laughter rising freely into the evening air. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't careful. It was joy unfiltered. Alive. Her scent shifted with it. Something warm, bright, unfamiliar. Something that didn't quite belong to the neat categories the world preferred. And it carried. Upward. Outward. Into the valley below. The SUV moved in silence along the winding road. Dark. Sleek. Untouchable. The window was slightly open. It was enough. Aradia Dondarian did not notice it at first. Why would she? The city had long since become background noise controlled, predictable, beneath her notice unless it demanded otherwise. But then it hit her. Not forcefully. Not sharply. Soft. Warm. Like stepping into sunlight after years spent in controlled shadow. Her breath caught. Her body stilled before her mind could process why. The scent wrapped around her senses, unfamiliar and impossible, slipping past every defense she had ever built without resistance, without consequence. No nausea. No rejection. No pain. Her fingers tightened subtly against the armrest. Her pulse controlled, disciplined, unwavering. Shifted. What? The word barely formed. Her head turned sharply toward the open window, senses straining, searching. There. Laughter. Light. Unrestrained. Alive. It threaded through the air, weaving itself into something deeper than sound. Something that reached. Aradia leaned forward slightly, her control fracturing at the edges in a way she had never experienced before. Stop the... Too late. The car had already taken the turn, climbing higher into the private roads that led to the estates above. The scent thinned, faded, vanished. Just like that. Aradia remained perfectly still. But something inside her did not settle back into place. Her breath came slower now. Measured. But not quite steady. For the first time in her life, something had reached her. Not forced. Not broken through. Simply entered. And the fortress, for the briefest moment, had not known how to keep it out. Chapter 3. The Hunt in Silence. Aradia Dondarrion did not believe in anomalies. Everything had a cause. Everything had a pattern. Everything, eventually, could be understood. That belief had built empires. So, when something slipped through her defenses, it did not become obsession. It became a problem. And Aradia solved problems. The SUV came to a smooth stop at the front of the glass fortress. Aradia did not move immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on nothing in particular, but her mind was not still. It replayed. Not the sound. Not the moment. The sensation. Warm. Soft. Impossible. Her fingers tightened once against the armrest. "Ma'am?" Her driver's voice was careful. She blinked once, slow. "Nothing," she said, already stepping out. But it wasn't nothing. And that was the problem. By the time she reached her office, the fortress had already begun to shift around her. Not visibly. Not to anyone else. But systems had been activated. Quietly. Precisely. Her assistant stood the moment she approached. "Elian." "Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. I want full residential records for the Lower Valley sector. No hesitation. Time frame. Current occupancy. Ownership history. Last 10 years. A beat. Eliminate commercial holdings. Focus on private residences." Elian's fingers were already moving across her tablet. "And classification?" she asked. Aradia paused. Just for a fraction. Omega registered households first. Elian did not react. She never did. "It will be ready within the hour." Aradia stepped into her office, the door sealing behind her with its usual quiet finality. The air was controlled. Clean. Neutral. And yet, for the first time, it felt lacking. She ignored that. Crossing to her desk, she activated the display as the first files began populating across the glass surface. Names. Profiles. Lineages. Scent classifications. Everything the system knew about every Omega residing within the Lower Valley. It was thorough. It was flawless. And it told her nothing. An hour later, she was still standing. Still reading. Still searching. There were no irregularities. No flagged mutations. No unusual scent markers. Nothing that explained what had reached her. Her jaw tightened. Not in frustration. In recalibration. She expanded the search. Property transfers. Unregistered occupants. Temporary stays. Still nothing. Which meant one thing. The system had not failed. It had simply not been designed to detect this. Aradia stepped back from the display. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then a shift. Subtle. Decisive. "If I cannot find it." Her voice was quiet. Measured. "I will bring it to me. Elian." Her assistant appeared almost immediately at the door. "Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. I want a position created." Elian stepped inside, already preparing to log it. Department. Aradia's gaze drifted briefly toward the city beyond the glass. Then back. Archives. A pause. Not hesitation. Precision. Title: Senior Archivist. Scope: Historical records. Foundational documentation. Pre-arch materials. Elian's brow shifted by the smallest degree. It was unusual. Alpha Core did not look backward. It built forward. "Qualifications?" she asked. Aradia's eyes sharpened. "Omega." That was not standard. Elian noted it without comment. "Anything specific?" Aradia considered. "Not resumes. Not credentials. Something else. Adaptive scent profile, she said finally. Unregistered variances. Nonlinear markers. Elian nodded once. I'll have the listing circulated within the hour. Make it visible. Not exclusive. Not hidden. Visible meant reach. Reach meant probability. Probability meant control. When the door closed again, Aradia allowed herself one moment. Just one. Her hand lifted, fingers brushing lightly against her own throat, as if recalling something that had never touched her. Her breath shifted. Barely, but enough. And in the silence of the glass fortress, Aradia Dondarrion acknowledged something she had never allowed before. Not desire. Not need. Something far more dangerous. Anticipation. Far below, in the valley, she had already begun to redraw without ever stepping foot into it again. Something answered. Quietly. Inevitably. Like gravity preparing to be felt. Chapter 4. The moment the air changed. The interviews had been disappointing. Predictable resumes. Predictable answers. Predictable sense. Each omega that entered the room was assessed, measured, and dismissed with the same quiet efficiency that defined Alpha Core itself. Aradia remained seated at the head of the obsidian table, posture flawless, expression unreadable. Nothing reached her. Nothing stirred. Nothing. Next candidate. Elian's voice was smooth, uninterrupted. The door opened. And the world shifted. Avaya Reeves stepped inside. She didn't hesitate. Didn't falter under the weight of the room or the presence at its center. She simply entered. Sunlight followed her in, catching in the soft waves of her hair, tracing along her shoulders like it had been waiting for her specifically. There was something unguarded about her, something unpracticed in the way she carried herself. Not careless. Just unarmored. The door closed behind her with a soft click. And Aradia stopped breathing. Her hand tightens unconsciously and her chest reacts before her thoughts do. It hit her instantly. Not like before. Not distant. Not carried on the wind. This was direct. Immediate. Undeniable. Warmth flooded her senses, wrapping around her like something alive, something aware. It wasn't overwhelming. It didn't demand, didn't press. It welcomed. Her body reacted before her mind could intervene. A sharp inhale. Her fingers tightened once against the armrest. Her pulse, disciplined, unwavering, fractured its rhythm. No nausea. No rejection. No pain. Only recognition. Avaya reached the table and offered a small, polite smile. Good morning. Her voice was soft, steady, threaded with something that felt dangerously close to familiarity. Aradia did not respond. Not immediately. Because for the first time in her life, she was not in control of what her body was doing. Her senses had narrowed. Focused. Locked. Every detail sharpened with unsettling clarity. The way Avaya's breath moved. The subtle shift of her weight from one foot to the other. The faint trace of something floral, something citrus, something alive that didn't belong to any classification Aradia had ever studied. Elian spoke, filling the silence with practiced ease. Avaya Reeve. Your application notes a background in historical preservation and private archival work. Avaya nodded lightly. Yes. Mostly estate collections. Some restoration work as well. Normal. Everything about her was normal. Except, nothing about this was. Aradia rose. Slowly. Deliberately. The movement drew every eye in the room, except Avaya's. She didn't flinch. Didn't shrink. Didn't avert her gaze. And that was new. Aradia stepped closer. One step. Two. Each one measured. Each one bringing her deeper into something she could not quantify. The scent intensified. Not stronger. Closer. Her breath caught again, quieter this time. Dangerous. She stopped just short of arm's reach. Too close. Not close enough. Your qualifications, Aradia said, her voice low, controlled, thinner than usual by a fraction no one else would notice, are unconventional for Alpha Core. Avaya tilted her head slightly, considering that. I suppose they are. No apology. No attempt to impress. Just truth. It landed harder than it should have. Silence stretched. But it wasn't empty. It was charged. Aradia's gaze held hers, searching, not for answers on paper, but for something deeper, something her body had already decided was there. What drew you to this position? The question was standard. Her tone was not. Avaya's lips curved faintly, thoughtful. I saw the listing, she said. It felt specific. Aradia's pulse stuttered. Specific. Yes, Avaya continued softly, almost to herself. Like it was looking for something, not just someone. The room stilled. Elian didn't move. No one did. Because something unspoken had just been placed on the table. Aradia stepped closer. Close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from Avaya's skin. Close enough that the world outside this space ceased to exist. Her control did not shatter. It narrowed. Dangerously. Are you often drawn to things that look for you? Avaya met her gaze fully now. And for the first time, something in her expression shifted. Not fear. Not submission. Recognition. I think, she said quietly, some things don't wait to be found. The words landed between them like a key turning in a lock. Aradia's breath deepened. Her body leaned, just a fraction. Not enough to touch. Enough to want to. That alone was catastrophic. Ms. Dondarrion? Elian's voice cut in, precise, grounding. Aradia stilled. The fortress slammed back into place. Seamless. Perfect. Except, it wasn't untouched anymore. She stepped back. Distance. Control. Breath. All candidates will be notified, she said. Voice returned to its usual clarity. But her gaze never left Avaya. Not once. Avaya nodded, calm as ever. Of course. She turned, gathering her file, and walked toward the door. And with every step she took away, Aradia felt it. The absence. Immediate. Sharp. Wrong. The door closed. The scent vanished. And the room felt hollow. Aradia remained standing. Still. Silent. Her hand lifted slowly, fingers brushing just beneath her jaw, her throat, as if confirming something had happened. Something real. Something irreversible. Elian. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. A pause. Then. Clear the remaining interviews. No hesitation. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. Aradia turned toward the window, the city stretching endlessly before her. But for the first time, it did not hold her attention. Because somewhere in that building, walking away without knowing what she had just done, was the only variable that had ever breached her. And Aradia Dondarrion did not intend to lose it again. Chapter 5. Orbit. Avaya Reeve did not expect to be hired. Not really. Alpha Core wasn't the kind of place that chose people like her. It chose precision. Predictability. People who fit neatly into systems that didn't bend. She wasn't any of those things. So, when the message came through the next morning, simple and direct. Position confirmed. Report Monday. She stared at it longer than necessary. Then smiled. All right, she murmured, a quiet spark lighting behind her eyes. Let's see what you're hiding. Alpha Core did not feel like a building. It felt like a decision that had already been made. Glass and steel rose in flawless lines, reflecting a sky too vast to belong to anything contained. Every surface was intentional. Every movement inside it, measured. Avaya stepped through the entrance without hesitation. The air changed instantly. Cooler. Filtered. Controlled. She paused just inside. Not because she was intimidated. Because something in her noticed. Like stepping into a space that was holding its breath. Then she moved. Ms. Reeve. Elian greeted her with the same polished efficiency as before. This way. Avaya followed easily, her gaze drifting not with suspicion, but curiosity. The kind that touched everything lightly, like fingertips brushing the surface of water. Big place, she said, voice soft but amused. It functions at scale, Elian replied. Avaya smiled faintly. That's one way to say it. The archives were unexpected. Not cold. Not forgotten. Ordered, yes, but not lifeless. Rows of preserved history stretched out in careful symmetry, illuminated by soft, indirect lighting. Digital interfaces hovered seamlessly alongside physical records, blending old and new without friction. Avaya stepped inside slowly, and something in her settled. Oh. The words slipped out without permission. Her fingers brushed lightly along the edge of a shelf, reverent without trying to be. You keep everything. Elimination is inefficient, Elian said. Avaya glanced back, a glint of something playful in her eyes. Or maybe someone just doesn't like letting things go. Elian did not respond. But she watched her more closely after that. Aradia Dondarrion did not go to the archives. She had no reason to. Her presence there would be unnecessary. And yet, at 9:13, she paused mid-sentence during a call. At 9:17, she ended it early. At 9:22, she was standing outside the archive level. Not entering. Just there. Still. Listening to nothing. Feeling everything. Inside, Avaya had already made herself at home in the quietest way possible. Not by changing anything, but by moving through it differently. Files that hadn't been accessed in years were opened, reviewed, reorganized with a kind of intuitive logic that didn't follow the system, but somehow improved it. She hummed under her breath. Soft. Unaware. Alive. The sound carried. Outside the door, Aradia felt it before she heard it. A shift in the air. Subtle. Pulling. Her hand hovered near the access panel. Didn't press. Didn't move. Because this was no longer investigation. This was proximity. And proximity had consequences she had not yet defined. Inside, Avaya paused. Mid-motion. Her head tilted slightly, like she'd caught the edge of something just out of reach. Not sound. Not sight. Just presence. Her brow furrowed, but only for a moment. Then she smiled to herself and went back to work. That was enough. Aradia turned away. Sharp. Controlled. Retreat disguised as decision. She walked back down the corridor without looking back. But her breath was no longer steady. Days turned into a pattern. And patterns Aradia understood. So, she let it happen. From a distance. Always controlled. Always deliberate. She learned quickly. Too quickly. Avaya arrived early. Not because she had to. Because she liked the quiet. She opened windows in spaces no one thought to touch. She spoke to the systems under her breath like they might answer. She reorganized records not by protocol, but by feeling. And somehow it worked. Aradia adjusted her schedule. Not noticeably. Not enough for anyone else to question. But enough. Enough to pass the archive corridor once. Twice. 3 times a day. Enough to stand just slightly longer at the glass overlooking the lower levels. Enough to almost be seen. And each time, it happened again. That shift. That warmth. That quiet, impossible sense of something aligning where it had never existed before. No sickness. No rejection. Only pull. Avaya noticed eventually. Not the pattern. Not the strategy. Just her. One afternoon, she looked up from a spread of old documents and caught a glimpse through the glass above a figure. Still. Watching. Gone the next second. Avaya blinked. Then smiled. Not as untouchable as you pretend, she murmured softly. By the end of the first week, nothing had happened. No conversations beyond necessity. No lines crossed. No rules broken. And yet, everything had changed. Because Aradia Dondarrion, who had built her life on distance, control, and absolute separation, now measured her days by something she refused to name. And Avaya Reeve, who had come home to rebuild a quiet life from the pieces left behind, had unknowingly stepped into the center of something vast enough to change the shape of everything around her. Neither of them reached. Not yet. But the space between them? It was no longer empty. It was charged. Like the moment before a storm decides it's done waiting. Chapter 6. The Edge of Control. Aradia Dondarrion had built her life on one principle: if it could not be controlled, it did not exist. Emotion, impulse, need, all categorized, all contained, all irrelevant. That principle had never failed her. Until now. She stood in her office long after the city had settled into night. The glass walls showed her everything. Lights like scattered constellations below. Movement reduced to patterns. Noise turned into distance. A world she could command with a word. And yet, her attention was not on it. It hadn't been for days. The archive level. That was the problem. Not a problem she could isolate. Not a system she could correct. A presence. Avaya Reeve. Arida exhaled slowly, measured, forcing precision into the motion. It did not help. Because control, she was beginning to realize, was not the absence of feeling. It was the discipline of ignoring it. And she was failing. She had stopped going down there. That was the decision she made. Simple. Efficient. Necessary. But her body did not agree with her logic. Her schedule bent around absence. Her routes shifted without instruction. Her mind anticipated. And that was worse. At 9:14, she found herself standing outside the archive corridor again. She did not remember deciding to come. She only remembered arriving. Still. Silent. Waiting. Her hand hovered near the access panel. Not touching. Never touching. Because she knew if she did, something would change. And Aradia Dondarrion did not allow change she had not approved. Inside, Avaya was laughing. Softly. Not at anything dramatic. Just something in a marginal note she had found in a centuries-old record. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to carry. But it did. It always did. Aradia felt it before she heard it. That sound. That ease. It slid under her skin like it had always belonged there. Her breath tightened. Not pain. Not sickness. Something more dangerous. Awareness. She stepped back. One pace. Then another. Controlled. Precise. But her hand did not fall from the panel. Not yet. Inside, Avaya paused. Her head tilted slightly. That same instinct again. Like the room had shifted by a fraction she couldn't name. She turned slowly toward the glass above the archives. Nothing. Just reflection. Just structure. Still, she smiled faintly. "You're here again," she said softly, not accusing. Not surprised. Just acknowledging something she couldn't yet see clearly. Outside, Aradia froze. Not at the words. At the certainty. Because Avaya had not been speaking to anyone. And yet it felt like she had been heard. Aradia stepped away. Too fast. A fraction sharper than intended. Her heel struck the floor with more force than necessary. She corrected it immediately. Still. Composed. Perfect. But her pulse did not obey. That night, she did not return to her office immediately. She stood in the upper observation corridor instead. Watching nothing in particular. Or perhaps watching everything she refused to name. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass. Unmoving. Controlled. Familiar. And yet, not entirely intact anymore. She raised a hand. Pressed two fingers lightly against the glass. Not as contact. As restraint. As reminder. As warning. This is not deviation, she said quietly to herself. A statement. Not reassurance. Reaction is not dependence. Her voice did not waver. But something in her chest did. Just slightly. Just enough. Below, Avaya closed another archive file. Stretched her arms above her head. Completely unaware of the fracture forming above her life like a second sky. Completely unguarded against it. Completely present. Aradia's jaw tightened. She stepped back from the glass. Forced movement. Forced direction. forced control, and walked away. But for the first time in her life, walking away did not feel like absence. It felt like loss of proximity. And that distinction was beginning to undo her quietly. Somewhere deep in the system she had built, structured, perfected, something had started to respond to Avaya Reeve. Not as data, not as anomaly, but as axis. And Aradia Dondarrion was beginning to orbit. Chapter 7. The Record That Remembers. The archives did not often surprise Avaya. Not anymore. She had learned its rhythm, how history folded itself into layers, how older truths hid beneath newer, cleaner versions of events. Most days, she followed threads for restoration work, gentle untangling of forgotten estates and sealed family histories. But today, something resisted her hands. It began with a misfile. A box that shouldn't have been where it was. Unmarked. Older than the surrounding cataloging system. No digital trace. No indexed reference. Just physical presence. Like it had been waiting. Avaya frowned slightly as she lifted it down. "All right," she murmured under her breath. "Let's see what you're being dramatic about." Inside, paper. Not data slabs. Not encrypted archives. Paper. Fragile. Warmed by time. Edges softened like breath had passed over it too many times. Her fingers slowed instinctively. Respect before curiosity. Then she read. Dondarrion Lineage Codex. Pre-Arc Sealing Records. Avaya blinked once. That name wasn't common in modern registries. Not in any system she had worked with. She leaned closer. Turned a page. Then another. And something in her posture changed. Subtle, but real. The document spoke of anchors. Not in metaphor. Not in myth. In structure. Bloodlines designated not for power, but for balance. Families bound to the stabilization of the Ark City grid before Kasiron became what it was now. Anchors were not rulers. They were keystones. Without them, systems didn't collapse loudly. They drifted. Slowly. Invisibly. Until they stopped holding. Avaya's fingers tightened slightly on the page. "That's not," she started softly. Then stopped. Because it was documented. Not theory. Not legend. Stamped. Verified. Archived. And then she saw it. A final entry. Cross-referenced lineage pairing. Dondarrion House. Anchor compatibility protocols. Successor lineage markers. And beneath it, a name. Her surname. Reeve. Avaya went still. Completely still. For the first time since entering the archives, she didn't feel curious. She felt watched by history. Behind her, the air shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just altered. Presence entering a space that already felt too small for what it contained. Avaya didn't turn immediately. She already knew. Not how. Not why. Just who. Aradia Dondarrion stood at the entrance of the archive room. Still. Perfectly composed. Except for the fact that she had not announced herself. And Aradia always announced herself. That was the first anomaly. The second was her gaze. It wasn't scanning the room. It was locked. On Avaya. Like everything else had stopped existing mid-thought. Avaya finally turned. Slowly. Their eyes met. And the world did something neither of them had permission to authorize. It paused. Aradia stepped inside. One movement. Controlled. But not untouched. The scent in the room changed immediately. It always did. But this time it didn't overwhelm. It aligned. Like something inside her had been waiting for this exact density of air. "You weren't authorized to access pre-arc codices," Aradia said. Her voice was steady. It was always steady. But there was something underneath it now. Something restrained. Avaya held up the document slightly, not defensive. Just honest. "It wasn't filed properly," she said. "It was in the wrong section." A pause. Then softer. "And I think it was waiting there." That landed. Not because it was poetic. Because it felt true in a way Aradia could not immediately dismantle. Aradia moved closer. Slow, measuring not space, but reaction. Her eyes dropped briefly to the document in Avaya's hands, then back to her face. You understand what you're reading? Avaya hesitated, then nodded. Not all of it. A faint breath. But enough to know my name shouldn't be in it. Silence. The kind that does not sit still. The kind that presses. Aradia reached for the document. Not forcefully. Just enough to take it. Her fingers brushed Avaya's. And the room shifted. Not visibly. Not externally. Internally. Like something deep inside Aradia had misfired. Just once. But enough. Her hand froze for half a second longer than intended. Then she took the file. Clean motion. Correct motion. Controlled motion. But her breathing did not match it. Avaya noticed. Of course she did. Not the structure of it. The pause. You're affected by this too, she said quietly. Not accusation. Observation. Aradia's gaze sharpened. Dangerously precise. I am not affected, she said immediately. Too immediate. Too clean. Avaya tilted her head slightly. That small, curious softness again. Then why does it feel like you already knew I'd find it? That question did not land like a challenge. It landed like recognition of inevitability. Aradia stepped closer. Now there was no polite distance left. Only space. And awareness of it. You are an employee, she said. But it didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like control trying to reassert itself over something it no longer fully understood. Avaya didn't move back. She should have. Most people would have. She didn't. Instead, she looked up at her. Calm. Present. And far too steady for someone standing in front of Aradia Dondarrion. I think, Avaya said gently, I'm something you didn't know you were waiting for. The air tightened. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But everything in Aradia went still. Too still. Like a system pausing before it decides whether to shut down or evolve. For the first time, Aradia did not have an immediate answer. And in that silence, something between them shifted permanently. Not spoken. Not named. But undeniably awake. Chapter 8. Fault Lines. Aradia Dondarrion did not believe in coincidence. But she was beginning to tolerate patterns she could not yet classify. And Avaya Reeve had become one of them. Not officially. Not publicly. But in every system Aradia touched, she was there. Not as data. As disruption. The archive access logs had been checked 3 times. Then 4. Then removed from general visibility. Not erased. Just relocated. Quietly. As if hiding it from scrutiny would return the world to order. It did not. Aradia stood in her office long after the building had emptied into night cycle protocols. Lights dimmed automatically across the cityscape below. Everything moved according to design. Everything except her thoughts. They did not obey. She replayed the moment. Not the words. Not the document. Avaya's voice. That calm certainty. That absence of fear in front of her. And worse, the way her body had responded before she allowed it to. A pause. A shift in breath. A fraction of stillness that should not have existed. Aradia's jaw tightened. This is irrelevant, she said aloud. No one answered. Of course not. But the silence didn't agree. Below her, the archive level was dark. Avaya had left hours ago. Logically, the absence should have restored equilibrium. It had not. It had only clarified it. Like removing noise and discovering the shape beneath it. Aradia walked. Not planned. Not scheduled. Just movement. Downward. Through corridors that knew her too well to question her presence. Until she stopped outside the archives. Again. She did not enter. Not immediately. Instead, she stood at the threshold. Like she was evaluating a variable that refused to remain static. And then she heard it. Soft movement inside. A faint rustle of pages. A breath of sound too light to be recorded by any system designed for surveillance. Avaya. Still there. Aradia's fingers curled slightly at her side. Unconscious. Controlled. Almost. She should have left. She should have cleared the building. She should have removed the variable. Instead, she opened the door. The archives were dim now. Low lighting. Quiet systems humming like distant memory. And there she was. Avaya Reeve. Standing between shelves, hair loosely tied back now, sleeves rolled up, completely unaware of how much space she occupied without trying. She was reading again. Of course she was. Avaya looked up when the door opened. Not startled. Just aware. As if she had expected the interruption eventually. Late night audit, she asked lightly. A faint attempt at humor. Or deflection. Or neither. Aradia stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Sound dampened instantly. Controlled environment reasserting itself. But something had already broken its symmetry. I was not informed you remained on premises, Aradia said. Formal. Carefully neutral. Avaya shrugged slightly. I lost track of time. A pause. Then softer. It's easier here than outside. That should not have mattered. It did. Aradia moved further into the room. Slow. Measured. Stopping at a distance that would normally feel appropriate. It did not feel appropriate now. It felt insufficient. What were you looking for? Aradia asked. Avaya hesitated. Then turned the document in her hands. The codex. Again. Always again. I think my family is in here, she said quietly. No drama. No performance. Just truth. Something inside Aradia tightened. Not externally visible, but undeniable. Reeve is not recorded in current anchor registries, she replied. Avaya nodded. I know. A pause. Then she looked up. Directly at her. But it is in here, she said. Older than your systems. Silence. Not empty. Not calm. Weighted. Like something large had settled between them without permission. Aradia should have corrected her. Dismissed it. Redirected. Instead, she stepped closer. Avaya did not move back. That was becoming a pattern. One Aradia was beginning to notice too often. Too sharply. Too personally. You are drawing conclusions from incomplete data, Aradia said. Avaya smiled faintly. That's what archives are, she replied. Incomplete data waiting for someone to care enough to piece it together. That word, care, landed too cleanly. Too dangerously. Aradia stopped. Close enough now that the air between them no longer felt neutral. It felt charged. Avaya tilted her head slightly. Studying her now. Not afraid. Not submissive. Just aware. I think, she said softly, you already know more than you're saying. Aradia's control tightened. Not breaking. But straining. Careful, she said. Low. Measured. A warning dressed as discipline. Avaya's gaze didn't falter. I am, she replied gently. A pause. Then, quieter still. I just don't think you are. The room changed. Not visibly. Not structurally. But something in Aradia shifted in response. Not outward control. Inward instability. A fault line discovering pressure for the first time. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Neither moved. The archives around them remained perfectly still. As if even history was listening now. And Aradia Dondarrion, who had built her entire existence on certainty, found, for the second time in her life, that she did not have one. Not about the city. Not about the system. And certainly not about the woman standing in front of her, holding a piece of the past that should not have been waiting for either of them. Chapter 9. Proximity has consequences. Aradia Dondarrion did not leave the archives immediately. That was the first deviation. She stayed long enough to ensure nothing else in the room shifted without her awareness. That was the excuse. But excuses were becoming less convincing. Avaya had returned to her work after a brief silence. As if the moment between them had not bent anything. As if Aradia had not stepped closer than she should have. As if control had not briefly lost its edges. That was what unsettled Erida most. Avaya did not treat her like something dangerous, or untouchable, or distant. She treated her like something present. Erida walked the corridor alone, each step precise, each breath measured. But the rhythm of both felt slightly misaligned, as if something had entered her system and rewritten its timing without permission. She disliked that. She could not correct it. That, more than anything, irritated her. Back in her office, she attempted to return to structure. Reports, projections, security updates from the northern border zones. All of it familiar. All of it controllable. And yet, her attention drifted. Not far. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice it drifting at all. Elian entered quietly. Ms. Dondarrion. The archivist's schedule requires your approval for extended evening access. Erida did not look up immediately. Approved, she said. Then paused. A fraction too long. Indefinite access, she added. Elian hesitated. That was not standard protocol. But she nodded once. As you wish. And left. Erida stared at the empty space after her assistant had gone. Indefinite access. The words did not align with logic. They aligned with something else. Something she refused to name. Meanwhile, Avaya Reeve was reorganizing a section of pre-arc migration records when she found the second inconsistency. Not a document. A gap. A missing linkage between Dondarrion records and early anchor designation files. Not an error. A removal. Intentional. She frowned. That's not subtle, she murmured. She leaned closer. Pulled another record. Then another. The pattern emerged slowly. Too slowly. Like something designed to only be noticed by someone who cared enough to keep looking past exhaustion. And when she did, it clicked. The Reeve line wasn't just present in anchor history. It was suppressed. Not erased. Contained. Controlled. Redirected out of modern records like a river forced underground. Avaya sat back slightly. Okay, she whispered. That's concerning. The air behind her shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. A presence arriving without announcement. Avaya did not turn immediately. She already knew. That awareness was becoming familiar now. Too familiar. Erida stood at the entrance. Again. Still. Watching. Again. Avaya exhaled lightly. You do realize, she said without looking up, this is starting to feel intentional. A pause. Then she turned. Slowly. Meeting her gaze. There are only so many times someone just happens to appear in an archive room. Erida did not respond immediately. That silence was not hesitation. It was recalibration. Because Avaya was not wrong. And Erida did not like being perceived accurately. I am reviewing archival operations, Erida said finally. Controlled. Professional. Detached. It sounded correct. It did not sound complete. Avaya tilted her head slightly. You don't usually review them personally, she said. Not accusation. Just observation. Erida stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Sound sealed. Space narrowed. Proximity increased. I make exceptions when systems show irregular behavior, Erida replied. Avaya's lips curved faintly. That's one way to describe me, she said softly. That landed differently. Because it was not deflection. It was acknowledgement. Erida stopped at a distance that should have been safe. It no longer felt safe. That was becoming a pattern she was not approving of. Show me the file, she said. Avaya turned the tablet slightly. The suppressed lineage data. Anchor lineage fragmentation. Dondarrion cross-sealing. And beneath it, Reeve designation. Hidden. But not gone. Eradia's eyes narrowed. Very slightly. Not at Avaya. At the structure. At the implication. At the fact that something this foundational had existed beneath her control without her awareness. That classification should not be accessible, she said. Avaya shrugged lightly. I didn't hack anything, she replied. It was just there. A pause. Then softer. like it wanted to be found. Aradia's gaze lifted, met hers, and for a moment, the room felt smaller than it should have. Not physically, relationally. You are not authorized to interpret anchor-level data, Aradia said. But it lacked force. Not because she had lost authority. Because authority no longer felt like the correct language for this interaction. Avaya closed the file. Carefully. Then looked at her fully. Then why does it feel like I'm the only one who can read it properly? Silence. Not empty. Not neutral. Pressurized. Aradia took one step closer. Then stopped. Not because she had decided to. Because something in her had registered that another step would no longer be professional distance. It would be something else entirely. Avaya did not move back. Of course she didn't. She simply looked at her. Calm. Present. Unaware of how dangerous that was becoming. You are overstepping interpretation boundaries, Aradia said. Avaya smiled faintly. And you're standing closer than you were yesterday. That did it. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But internally, something shifted. A recalibration she did not initiate. Aradia stepped back. Clean motion. Controlled retreat. But the damage was not in proximity anymore. It was in recognition of it. Continue your work, Aradia said. Then paused. Just once. Barely there. I will review the findings. And left. Avaya watched her go. Quiet. Curious. Not afraid. Then looked back down at the file. Yeah, she murmured to herself. This is definitely not just an archive job. And somewhere above her, Aradia Dondarrion walked through her fortress like a system that had begun quietly rewriting its own rules. Without permission. Without warning. And without a way to stop it. Chapter 10. The Tilt. Aradia did not come to the archives on impulse. She came because impulse was becoming harder to distinguish from calculation. That distinction annoyed her. So she refined it. Or tried to. The archive doors opened with their usual controlled silence. Inside, everything was as it should be. Order. Light. Structure. And Avaya Reeve already there. Of course she was. Avaya looked up the moment Aradia entered. Not startled. Not surprised. Just aware. That awareness was becoming its own problem. Late inspection again? Avaya asked lightly, voice carrying a hint of amusement she didn't bother to hide. Aradia stopped just inside the room. I was not scheduled to be here, she replied. A pause. That does not require interpretation. Avaya smiled faintly. Yet here you are. And there it was again. That simple refusal to be impressed by hierarchy. It should have been corrected. It wasn't. Aradia stepped further in. Controlled. Measured. Every movement carefully placed like a system executing a known command. But her attention was already narrowing. Because Avaya was closer than usual. Not physically. Not yet. But something about the room shifted. Avaya was standing at a lower shelf now, reviewing older codex fragments. When Aradia spoke again, she turned. And in doing so, she tilted her head slightly. Just enough. To listen better. To catch every syllable. To be present. It was an unconscious gesture. Small. Natural. Harmless. But scent does not negotiate intention. Aradia felt it before she understood it. A shift. A break in continuity. Warmth threading through the air like something waking up too quickly. Her breath caught. Once. Then stopped obeying rhythm entirely. Avaya continued speaking. So this section seems to overlap with the pre-arc anchor registry, but the notation system is inconsistent. I think someone deliberately. She stopped. Not because she noticed Aradia, but because Aradia had stopped responding. Aradia's focus had narrowed to a single point in space. Avaya. The angle of her head. The way her voice softened when she leaned slightly closer to explain a detail. The way her scent, shifted just enough with movement to slip past every internal barrier Aradia had constructed. Not overwhelming. Not invasive. Worse. Compatible. Her system misfired. Once. Then again. A sharp internal warning that did not translate into language. Just reaction. Immediate. Uncontrolled. Aradia stepped back. Too quickly. The movement broke the stillness like a snapped thread. Avaya blinked. Are you? I need air. The words came out cleaner than her control. Stronger than she felt. She turned. Walked. Not fast enough to look like escape. Barely. But it was. The corridor outside hit her like distance trying to reassert itself. It did not work. The scent followed. Or maybe it didn't need to. Maybe it was already inside the system now. Aradia stopped once she was far enough from Avaya that the reaction lessened. Not gone. Lessened. That was new. That was worse. Her hand lifted slightly, pressing against the wall for balance she refused to admit she needed. This is not deviation, she said under her breath. But it didn't sound convincing anymore. Behind her, the archive door remained closed. Avaya stood still for a moment, then frowned slightly. Did I say something wrong? She looked around. No answer. Just quiet shelves and older history watching her like it always had. She shrugged softly and went back to work. Aradia moved down the corridor. Fast now. Controlled urgency replacing structure. Her breath was uneven. Not broken, but no longer precise. And she hated that more than anything. She reached her office. Reached for her desk. Reached for anything that resembled stability. And then paused. Her phone wasn't there. Her hand hovered. Checked again. Nothing. A sharp, immediate realization. Archives. Aradia closed her eyes once. Slow. Measured. A correction attempt. It failed. Of course, she muttered. And turned back. Back at the archives, Aradia's phone lay on the desk she had been working at. Abandoned mid-task. Screen dark. Silent. Waiting. It began to ring. Once. Twice. Catherine Dondarrion. Incoming call. Avaya glanced over. That's not mine. She picked it up anyway. Curious. Not cautious. And pressed accept. Hello. The voice on the other end did not belong to confusion. It belonged to clarity trying to remember itself. Hello. A pause. Then softer, uncertain. Aradia, is that you? Avaya frowned slightly. No, she said gently. I think you've got the wrong person. Silence. Then a breath on the other end that sounded like something unlocking. No, Catherine whispered. No, I don't. And somewhere down the corridor, Aradia Dondarrion froze mid-step. Because she felt it. Not sound. Not logic. Something deeper. A shift in her mother's voice across distance and time that had not existed in 10 years of silence. And in that same moment, Avaya Reeves stood in the archive room holding a phone she should not have answered, while history quietly decided it had waited long enough. Chapter 11. The Thing Beneath the Silence. Aradia did not run. Not at first. Running implied panic. Panic implied lack of control. And Aradia Dondarrion did not break structure. Even when structure was already bending under her skin. The corridor to the archives felt longer than it should have been. Not physically. Perceptually. Like the air itself had thickened in protest of her return. Each step forward tightened something behind her ribs. Not pain. Not fear. Recognition refusing to stay quiet. Inside the archive room, Avaya still held the phone. Still standing exactly where she had answered it. Still unaware that everything in the world outside that room had just shifted direction. I think she's disconnected, Avaya said softly into the device. But the silence on the other end wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. Catherine's voice returned. But it was no longer confused. It was anchored. Avaya Reeve, she said carefully, as if testing the shape of reality. Do not hang up. A pause. Then, quieter. You need to stay exactly where you are. Avaya blinked. Okay. It wasn't fear. It was instinctive compliance with something older than explanation. The door opened. Aradia stepped inside, and the room reacted. Not visibly, but structurally, as if the space itself had been holding its breath and forgot how to exhale. Avaya turned, slowly, and something in her expression softened at the sight of her. Not surprise, not alarm, just alignment. "You left your phone," she said, almost gently, like that was the most normal thing in the world. Aradia did not respond immediately, because she could not. The scent hit again. But this time, it did not arrive alone. It arrived with memory. Not hers. Not fully. Something older. Something buried in architecture, not emotion. Her body reacted before thought. A sharp inhale. A tightening behind the sternum. A pulse that did not match any known baseline. Her control didn't fail. It fractured. Clean. Precise. Dangerous. Avaya stepped slightly closer. Just one step. Curious. Unafraid. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, and tilted her head again. That same unconscious motion. Listening. Present. Open. The moment her scent shifted, it was over. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Invisibly. Like a locked system finding its correct key after centuries of denial. Aradia staggered. One step back. Then stopped herself mid-motion. Too late. Her body had already answered something her mind had not authorized. A low breath left her uncontrolled. Raw. Uncharacteristic. Avaya froze. Not in fear. In awareness. That didn't just. She stopped speaking. Because the air between them had changed density. Like gravity had decided to become personal. Aradia's gaze locked onto her. Not tactical anymore. Not observational. Biological recognition layered over willpower. "No," Aradia said quietly. Not denial. Correction. As if she could still edit reality. "It should not." Her voice cut. Because the sentence no longer knew how to finish itself. Catherine's voice crackled through the phone in Avaya's hand. Stronger now. Clearer. Like something inside her mind had stepped forward after a decade of silence. "It's her," Catherine said. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty returning like a forgotten language. Aradia's head snapped slightly toward the sound. Mother. The word left her before permission. Before control. Before anything she trusted. Avaya looked between Aradia and the phone. Then slowly lowering the phone. "What is happening?" she asked. But there was no panic in it. Only curiosity pressed against something older trying to surface. Catherine inhaled sharply. And when she spoke again, it was no longer fragmented. It was lucid. "You've found her," she said to Aradia. A pause. Then softer. "No, you've been found." Aradia's breath stopped again. Not from shock. From internal systems misaligning at once. Her body responded before her identity could correct it. A faint tremor in her fingers. A step forward she did not consciously choose. Avaya instinctively mirrored it. Just slightly. Not retreating. Not advancing. Meeting. That was the moment it happened. Not touch. Not kiss. Not contact. Alignment. Something inside Aradia clicked. Not metaphorically. Structurally. Like a sealed chamber finally recognizing its intended occupant. Her vision sharpened. Then softened. Then expanded in a way she could not control. Avaya inhaled, and the scent released fully. Not stronger. Not louder. Just complete. And Aradia's entire nervous system responded like it had been waiting its entire existence for that exact signal. Her hand lifted. Not aggressively. Not carefully. Just inevitability rising through instinct. Her fingers stopped just short of Avaya's wrist. Hesitated. A fraction of restraint still fighting. Avaya didn't move away. Instead, she stepped in, closing the gap herself. Small. Unaware of the magnitude. But perfect. And that was what broke it. Not force. Not dominance. Permission without understanding. Aradia's control collapsed, not violently, but like glass finally admitting it had always been cracked. Her breath broke. Once. Then steadied into something deeper. Something no longer entirely hers. Catherine's voice came through the phone one last time. Soft. Certain. You don't fight it, she said. You were never meant to. A pause. Then. She is your anchor, Aradia. The word didn't land. It activated. Aradia's eyes closed for half a second. When they opened, something in her gaze had changed. Not softness. Not surrender. Recognition with purpose. Avaya whispered, barely audible. What am I to you? Aradia stepped closer. This time, no retreat followed. No correction. No hesitation. Only truth forming too large to remain unspoken. And when she finally answered, her voice was no longer just hers. It was something older. Something aligned. Something waking. You are the reason I am not broken, she said. A pause. Then quieter. You are the reason I can still stand. And somewhere deep beneath the city of Kasiran, systems that had slept for centuries began to register a signal they were never designed to forget. The anchor had been found. And the Protector Alpha had finally answered. Chapter 12. After the lock clicks. The archives did not return to normal. Not immediately. Not even after Avaya left for the night. Normal required ignorance. And ignorance was no longer available. Avaya walked out of Alpha Core slower than she expected to. Not because she was tired. Because the building felt different now. Like something inside it had learned her shape. And wasn't finished remembering it. She pressed a hand briefly to her chest outside the glass doors. Okay, she whispered to herself. That was a day. A faint smile followed. Not fear. Not comprehension. Just instinct trying to make peace with the unexplainable. Behind her, high above the city, Aradia remained in the archive level long after Avaya had gone. Still standing where alignment had occurred. As if moving too soon might undo something she didn't yet understand how to hold. The phone still lay on the desk. Catherine's call had ended hours ago. But Aradia had not moved to retrieve it. Because her attention was no longer split. It had narrowed. Sharpened. Focused inward in a way it had never been allowed to before. For the first time in years, her body was not an adversary. It was speaking clearly. And she was finally hearing it. Aradia lifted her hand slightly. Slow. Measured. Fingers hovering where Avaya had stood closest to her. The air there still carried a residual warmth. Not scent anymore. Memory of scent. And it made her breath tighten again. Not with discomfort. With absence. She exhaled once. Controlled. But incomplete. Anchor, she said quietly. Testing the word. It did not feel theoretical anymore. It felt structural. Like the world had a missing axis and she had just found where it belonged. A notification pulse flickered across her internal system. Elian had flagged it hours ago. But Aradia had ignored it. Now she didn't. Northern grid unstable, anomalous response detected. Her gaze narrowed slightly. So, it had begun. Not coincidence. Reaction. Something in the outer territories had felt it too. The shift. The awakening. The imbalance caused by alignment. Aradia closed the file without fully reading it. She already understood the implication. This was not personal. Not anymore. It never had been. Not entirely. Footsteps echoed softly in the corridor outside. Elian appeared at the threshold. Ms. Dondarian, she said carefully. Security requests confirmation. There has been unusual signal activity across outer monitoring arrays. A pause. Then, patterns match historical anchor disturbance signatures. Silence. Not hesitation. Calculation. Aradia finally turned. Slow. Controlled. But something in her presence had changed enough that Elian noticed it immediately. Not visually. Structurally. Like pressure shifting in a sealed room. Define disturbance, Aradia said. Elian hesitated. Then answered honestly. External systems are reacting to something they cannot locate. A beat. They are searching for a source. Aradia's gaze drifted briefly toward the empty space where Avaya had stood earlier. Then back. Of course they are, she said quietly. Not alarmed. Not surprised. Just confirming reality. Because now it was simple. Too simple. If Avaya was the anchor, then she was not just a variable within Aradia's world. She was the reason the world held shape at all. And anything that recognized instability would move toward her. Aradia stepped away from the desk. Finally. Decision forming with cold precision again. Not the old control. Something new. Something anchored to purpose instead of denial. Elian, she said. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. Increase internal security across all Alpha Core levels. A pause. Then. Classify Avaya Reeve as protected essential asset. Elian froze slightly. That was not standard classification. Not even close. But she recovered quickly. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. Aradia's gaze returned to the glass wall. The city below was unchanged. But it no longer felt separate. It felt aware. Like it had begun to sense its own instability. And somewhere inside that awareness, Avaya Reeve walked home under a sky that did not yet know it had started to shift around her existence. She paused halfway down the street. Looked up. Frowned slightly. Why does it feel like I'm being watched? She murmured. Then shrugged softly. And kept walking. Back at Alpha Core, Aradia Dondarrion stood alone in the glass fortress. No longer searching. No longer reacting. Just understanding the shape of what had entered her life. And for the first time since she had built her empire, Aradia did not think in terms of control. She thought in terms of protection. Because something ancient in her had finally recognized its counterpart. And now it would not allow it to be taken. Chapter 13. The Shape of Protection. Aradia Dondarrion did not sleep. Not in the way the world understood it. Her body rested. Her mind did not. It remained where it had been for hours. Anchored in a single realization that refused to dissolve with time. Avaya Reeve was no longer a variable. She was a core stabilizing force. And that meant the world would respond accordingly. The first breach came before dawn. Not physical. Signal. A spike in outer grid scanning patterns, sharp enough to trigger internal alarms across Alpha Core's northern surveillance chain. Elian appeared in Aradia's office within minutes. 3 independent tracking protocols have been activated, she reported. Unknown origin. They are triangulating the lower valley sector. Aradia did not move immediately. Then. Source classification? Elian hesitated. Unregistered external authority. Not corporate. A pause. Then quieter. Military-adjacent interference. Aradia exhaled once. Controlled. Not surprised. Confirmed. They felt her, she said. Elian didn't respond. She didn't need to. The implication had already settled into the room. Somewhere beyond Alpha Core's reach, systems that had never acknowledged each other began to converge. Not because they shared intelligence, but because they shared instinct. Something had awakened. And it had a location. Aradia turned toward the glass wall. The city below was still sleeping. Unaware. Unprepared. Delicately balanced on structures it did not understand. Elian, she said quietly. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. Initiate silent perimeter shielding around Avaya Reeve's residence. A pause, then. Remove visibility from all non-core systems. Elian's fingers hovered. That will isolate her from public monitoring entirely. Aradia's gaze didn't shift. That is the point. A beat of silence. Then. Yes, Ms. Dondarrion. When Elian left, Aradia remained standing. Still. But not calm. Not anymore. Something inside her had changed its operational logic. Not emotion. Function. She reached for the archived file again. Opened it. Anchor Codex. Reeve designation. Dondarrion stabilizer linkage. The words no longer felt like theory. They felt like architecture. Like the city itself had been built around two missing coordinates, and one of them had just been found. Her hand paused over the display. Not hesitation. Recognition. Because somewhere deep in the system, a second signal had appeared. Unmapped, but familiar. Avaya Reeves' biometrics had briefly aligned with dormant anchor resonance fields. Not activation. Not yet. But response. Aradia's breath shifted. Just slightly. This is not acceleration, she said quietly. A correction. A grounding statement. But even she heard the flaw in it. Because everything was accelerating. At that exact moment, Avaya stood in her small home kitchen, barefoot, making tea she wasn't really paying attention to. She frowned slightly, then looked down at her hands. "Why do I feel like I forgot something important?" she murmured. The kettle clicked off behind her. Too loud in the silence. She shook it off, smiled faintly, probably just tired, and turned away. Above the city, Aradia closed the file. Not because she was finished. Because she was no longer reading it for information. She was reading it for confirmation of inevitability. Elian returned briefly. "Security reports confirm movement in the northern grid," she said. 3 separate factions. No identification yet. A pause. "They are converging." Arida nodded once. "Slow. Measured. Expected. Let them," she said. Elian blinked slightly. "Ma'am?" Aradia finally turned. And for the first time in a long time, there was something unmistakably final in her gaze. Not anger. Not fear. Purpose. "They will come to what they can perceive," she said. "That does not concern me." A pause. Then quieter. "It only confirms what matters." Elian hesitated. Then asked carefully, "And what is that?" Aradia looked toward the city below. Not as an empire. Not as a system. But as a boundary forming around something it had not yet learned how to hold. "Avaya Reeve remains untouched," she said. A beat. Then, "Anything that attempts otherwise will not persist." The words were not spoken loudly. But they did not need volume. They carried structure. Later that morning, Avaya stepped outside to leave for Alpha Core. And stopped. Frowning. The street felt different. Quieter. Not empty. Filtered. Like something had placed invisible distance between her and everything else. She tilted her head slightly. "Did I move?" she muttered. Then shrugged. And kept walking. Inside Alpha Core, Arida watched her arrival on internal systems. Not surveillance. Awareness. And when Avaya entered the building, something in the system reacted again. Faster this time. Stronger. Aradia's fingers curled slightly at her side. Not control slipping. Control redefining itself. "Prepare containment contingencies," she said quietly. Elian didn't question this time. "Yes, Ms. Dondarrion." Because now it was clear. This was no longer about discovery. No longer about alignment. It was about what the world would do once it realized what had been returned to it. And Aradia Dondarrion, who had spent her entire life building walls around power, was now standing inside the only force she had ever encountered that did not respect walls at all. Chapter 14. The Call That Remembers. Aradia was already at the edge of leaving when the call came. She didn't answer immediately. She rarely did. But the identifier bypassed standard filters. Catherine Dondarrion. Direct line. Ancient priority override. A protocol that should have been dormant. Arida paused. Just once. Then accepted. "Mother," she said. A beat of silence followed. Not broken silence. Evaluating silence. Then, Aradia, Catherine's voice came through, clearer than before. Too clear. Like something long buried had finally found air again. "I can see you now." Aradia's expression tightened slightly. "That is not possible." A soft breath on the other end. A faint sound that might have been laughter. "Oh, my darling," Catherine said gently. "So much of what you believe is not possible has simply not been remembered yet." A pause. Then her tone shifted. Slightly sharper. Intentional. Bring her. Eridia didn't move. Explain. Catherine exhaled slowly. And for the first time since her voice had returned to clarity, there was hesitation. Not doubt. Wait. You've met her, she said. You felt it. Aradia's jaw tightened. That was not a question. She is not just an Omega, Catherine continued. A pause. Then. She is the anchor line itself. Silence. Not empty. Structural collapse held in place by discipline. Eridia stepped slightly away from the glass. The anchor line is extinct. No, Catherine said softly. It was removed from record. A beat. Then quieter. By fear. By politics. By the Northern Accord. Aradia's eyes narrowed. The Northern Accord dissolved generations ago. And yet, Catherine replied, its consequences did not. A pause. Then the shift came. Not dramatic. Not sudden. But final. Eridia, Catherine said more gently now. This is not a conversation for distance. A breath. You need to bring Avaya Reeve here. A pause. Then. And you need to hear what her parents chose to protect her from. Aradia's silence deepened. Because parents changed the shape of the equation. That was no longer theory. That was history with intention. Catherine continued. When you were a child, she said slowly, I told you there were families tied to the stabilization of Kasairan's first systems. A pause. You never asked what happened to them. Aradia's gaze sharpened slightly. I was not given reason to. A faint, tired sound from Catherine. That, she said softly, was the problem. Another pause. Then. Avaya's parents did not lose her, Catherine said. They hit her. Aradia's breath shifted slightly. Not emotion. Calculation tightening. From what? She asked. Catherine's voice lowered. From the moment the world realized what she is. A pause. And from what would come looking for her once she woke something that had been asleep too long. Aradia's fingers flexed once at her side. The northern factions. Yes. A beat. And from systems like yours. That landed differently. Not accusation. Warning. Catherine continued. The Reeve line were original anchor conduits, she said. Not rulers. Not elites. Stabilizers. Living reference points for the ARC system before it became automated. A pause. But they were never meant to be visible. Aradia's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why does she exist outside protection protocols? A soft exhale. Because her parents broke protocol. A pause. They removed her from the grid entirely. Silence. This one heavier. Older. Catherine's voice softened again. They raised her as something the system could not classify. A pause. And that is why she feels untouched. Aradia's gaze drifted slightly toward the archive direction. Toward where Avaya existed in her world. Unaware of the scale she occupied. And the Dondarians? Eridia asked quietly. A pause. Then Catherine answered. Carefully. Were the counterweight. Eridia stilled. That word. Counterweight. Catherine continued. Your line and hers were designed to stabilize each other, she said. Anchor and protector. Structure and enforcement. One without the other creates drift. A pause. And drift is what the world has been experiencing for years. Aradia's breath slowed. Something inside her reordering. Not emotion. Recognition of design. And now, she asked. Catherine's voice softened. Now you've found each other again. A beat. And the system is remembering what it forgot how to hold. Silence. Not empty. Reverent. Then Catherine added, quieter. Bring her to me, Eridia. A pause. She needs to hear what her parents sacrificed to keep her from becoming a weapon before the world decides she already is one. Eridia didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time, this was no longer about anomaly. No longer about instinct. No longer even about protection. It was about history correcting itself in real time. Finally, Eridia spoke. Controlled. Precise. I will bring her. A pause. Then. But not without preparation. Catherine's voice softened. I would expect nothing less. A beat. Then gentler. And Aridia. Yes. A pause. Then. Be careful how you look at her, Catherine said quietly. Some bonds do not form gently. They remember what they were before they were broken. The line disconnected. Aridia remained still. For a long time. Not moving. Not deciding. Simply absorbing what had just been returned to the present. Then she turned. And began the process of changing everything again. Because now Avaya Reeve was not just in her orbit. She had been written into her origin. Chapter 15, Where Memory Breathes. The facility sat beyond the city's clean geometry. Not abandoned. Just intentionally quiet. Like someone had asked the world to lower its voice here. Avaya arrived first. Not alone. Aridia was with her. Of course she was. But not close enough to touch. Not yet. Distance had become its own language between them. One neither of them had agreed to, but both understood too well. Avaya stepped out of the vehicle and looked up at the building. Smaller than Alpha Core. Older than Alpha Core. Less glass. More stone. More time. This feels different, she said softly. Not uncomfortable. Just aware. Aridia stood beside her, eyes fixed on the entrance. Yes, she said. A pause. Then quieter. It is. They did not speak again as they entered. The air changed immediately. Not filtered. Not controlled. Just present. Like it had been waiting to be noticed. Inside, the corridors were soft lit. Warm in a way that felt almost disarming. Avaya's steps slowed slightly without her realizing it. Aridia noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything about Avaya now. That was the problem. At the end of the corridor, a door. Not marked with titles. Not labeled with status. Just a nameplate. C. Dondarrion. Avaya exhaled quietly. So this is her. Aridia didn't answer. Because she wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at Avaya. As if trying to measure what this moment would do to her. The door opened before they touched it. Not automatically. Intentionally. Catherine Dondarrion stood there. Older than memory should allow. But not fragile. Never fragile. Her gaze moved to Aridia first. Softening slightly. Then to Avaya. And that was where everything changed. A long silence. Not awkward. Recognizing. Like something in Catherine had been waiting for exactly this alignment to return. Avaya Reeve, she said gently. A pause. Then. You look like your mother used to when she first realized she was being watched by the wrong kind of history. Avaya blinked slightly. I'm sorry. A faint, knowing smile. You will be, Catherine said. But not unkindly. Never unkindly. Aridia stepped in beside Avaya. Controlled. Present. But tighter now. Like something in her had already begun bracing for impact. Mother, Aridia said. Catherine's eyes shifted to her. And there she is, she murmured. A pause. You've felt it now, haven't you? Not a question. Aridia didn't respond. She didn't need to. Catherine nodded slightly as if that was answer enough. Come in, she said softly. Then stepped back. Not retreating. Inviting. The room inside was not clinical. Not like Aradia's world. Not like Avaya's expectations either. It was lived in. Books. Old data strips. Physical records mixed with digital overlays that flickered softly like half-remembered thoughts. Avaya stepped inside slowly. Aridia followed. But the moment they crossed the threshold, Catherine closed the door. And the air changed again. Not physically. Structurally. Like something outside had stopped being allowed to listen. Catherine turned to them both. And for the first time, her voice carried no fragmentation at all. Only clarity. You brought her here, she said to Aridia. A pause. Then softer. And you let yourself stand this close to her. Aradia's joy tightened slightly. I had no choice. Catherine's gaze flicked briefly to Avaya. Then back. Oh, my darling, she said gently. You always have choice. A pause. You're just beginning to understand which ones cost you more. Avaya shifted slightly, unaware of the depth of what was being said, but not untouched by it either. Can someone please explain what is actually happening? She asked quietly. Not afraid. Just honest. Catherine smiled faintly. That is what your parents tried to avoid, she said. Avaya went still. My parents. Aradia's focus sharpened instantly. Catherine walked slowly toward them. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Like every step had already been taken in memory before it was taken in reality. Yes, she said softly. They were the last pair who understood what anchor and protector meant before the system broke the language for it. A pause. And they chose to hide you instead. Avaya's breath shifted. Not fear. Confusion deepening into something heavier. From what? Catherine stopped in front of her, looked at her fully, and answered without softening it. From being used, she said. A pause. From being taken. Then quieter. From becoming something the world would mistake for power instead of balance. Silence. Thick. Not empty. Full of history pressing forward. Aradia spoke finally. Explain the Dondarrion connection. Catherine turned slightly toward her, and something in her expression changed. Older now. Heavier. Proud in a way that did not ask permission. You were never meant to rule alone, she said. A pause. You were meant to hold. To protect what stabilized you. Her gaze shifted to Avaya again. And she was meant to stabilize what protects everything else. Avaya exhaled slowly. That doesn't sound like a job description, she murmured. Catherine almost smiled. It isn't, she said. It's what happens when the world forgets it has balance built into it. Aradia's voice dropped slightly. And the northern factions? Catherine's expression darkened just a fraction. They never forgot, she said. They just started calling imbalance, opportunity. That word hung. Opportunity. Like something predatory disguised as progress. Avaya looked between them now, slowly realizing the weight she had been carrying without knowing it had a name. So what am I? She asked quietly. Not fragile, but finally asking the correct question. Catherine stepped closer, gently lifted her hand. Did not force, did not claim, just rested it lightly over Avaya's wrist, like confirming existence. You are not a weapon, she said softly. Then a pause. You are not a mistake. Her voice softened further. You are the part of the system that makes sure everything else does not collapse under itself. Avaya's throat moved slightly. Aradia didn't look away from her. Not once. Catherine turned to Aradia. And you, she said quietly, are the reason she was never found too early. A pause. Because you were always going to find her first. Silence again. But different now. Less unknown. More inevitable. And in that moment, something between Aradia and Avaya stopped feeling like discovery. And started feeling like return. Chapter 16. The Sky Opens First. The room inside Catherine's quarters had only just begun to settle. Not quiet. Never quiet. More like, held. Like the air itself was waiting to see what decision would be made next. Avaya stood close enough now that she could feel it. Not fear. Pressure. Something vast pressing gently against the edges of her awareness, as if the world had finally decided to acknowledge her fully. Aradia stood opposite her. Still. Controlled. But no longer untouched by uncertainty. That was new. That was dangerous. Catherine's gaze moved between them. Slow. Certain. Like she was reading a script only she could see fully written. Then she spoke. Softly. But with the kind of clarity that cuts through denial. You don't have time anymore. Aradia's eyes narrowed slightly. Time for what? Catherine didn't look at her. She looked at Avaya. You are no longer hidden, she said. A pause. And the North has felt it. Avaya blinked. The North. Aradia's posture changed instantly. Not panic. Recognition of threat architecture. What has moved? She asked sharply. Catherine's expression darkened just slightly. Everything that feeds on imbalance. And then it happened. Not subtle, not metaphorical. The first sound hit the building like a distant thunderclap. Then another. Then the sky itself seemed to split open with mechanical precision. Rotors. Heavy. Close. Too close. Avaya stepped toward the window instinctively. What is that? Aradia moved first, positioning herself between Avaya and the glass without conscious thought. Pure instinct. Protection protocol overriding everything else. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. They're early, she murmured. Aradia snapped her attention to her. Explain. Catherine exhaled once, then opened her eyes again. And this time, there was no softness left. Only urgency. They've identified the anchor resonance, she said. A pause. And they are not coming to negotiate. Another beat. They are coming to extract. Avaya's breath caught. Extract me. The word didn't land as drama. It landed as disbelief trying to form into reality. Aradia's voice dropped. Cold now. Controlled in a different way. No one will take you. It wasn't a promise. It was a structural statement. Catherine stepped forward. Close now. Too close to ignore. Aradia, she said firmly. You are out of time for preparation. A pause. Then. You need to complete the bond. Silence. Everything stopped obeying normal rhythm. Even the sound of helicopters above seemed to hesitate. Aradia stared at her. What did you just say? Catherine didn't flinch. I said complete it. A pause. Then quieter. Anchor and protector are not theoretical roles, Arida. They are activation states. Avaya turned sharply. What does that mean? Catherine finally looked at her fully, and her voice softened just enough to make it worse. It means you don't survive separation now. A pause. It means what you are becomes stable only when you are aligned. Aradia's expression tightened. This is not supported by any current operational framework. Catherine almost smiled. No, she said. It was removed from them. The sky outside roared again. Closer this time. The building's glass vibrated faintly under pressure waves. They were landing. Or preparing to. Or deciding. Avaya stepped back slightly. Not fear. Overload. I don't understand any of this, she said quietly. Aradia turned to her immediately. The protector in her fully surfaced now. Steady. Present. Focused. You don't need to understand everything, she said. Just softer. You just need to stay here. Catherine stepped in again. No, she said. Sharp. Final. Both of them looked at her. And what she said next didn't sound like instruction. It sounded like memory finally correcting itself. If they breach that perimeter before alignment stabilizes, she said, she will become detectable across every remaining grid. A pause. And they will not stop at capture. Avaya swallowed. Then what do we do? Catherine looked at Aradia. Not Avaya. Aradia. And for the first time, there was something almost ancient in her expression. You finish what your body's already started, she said quietly. A pause. Then, direct. Aradia. You need to kiss her. Silence. Not disbelief. Collapse of internal logic trying to recompile itself. Aradia blinked once. That is not an acceptable operational response. Catherine didn't move. It is the only one that works in time. Avaya looked between them. What is she talking about? Aradia's voice dropped. Controlled strain. She is not thinking clearly under threat conditions. Catherine stepped closer to Arida now. Her voice softened, but didn't lose force. You felt it, she said. That moment in the archive. A pause. Don't pretend you didn't. Aradia's jaw tightened. That was physiological resonance triggered by proximity anomaly. Catherine nodded once. Yes. A beat. And that is exactly what your system calls activation. The helicopters roared again. Lower now. Closer. The building lights flickered slightly as energy shielding engaged. Too late. Or just in time. It was no longer clear. Catherine turned slightly toward Avaya. Her voice gentler now. This isn't romance, she said softly. It's alignment. A pause. And without it, You both fracture under external pressure. Avaya's breath was uneven now. Not fear. Wait. Too much meaning arriving too quickly. I don't even know what that means, she whispered. Erida stepped closer. Slow. Not command now. Choice under constraint. Her voice lowered. I do not agree with forced activation protocols. Catherine nodded. I know. A pause. Then. And yet you are still standing between her and everything that is about to tear through this building. That landed. Because it was true. Undeniably. Another explosion of rotor force hit the sky above. The building's system shifted again. Shields failing to fully stabilize. They were inside engagement range now. Catherine looked at Eridia one final time. And her voice softened just slightly. You don't have time to stay afraid of what you feel. A pause. You only have time to use it. Eridia turned to Avaya. Really looked at her now. Not as anomaly. Not as variable. Not as problem or answer. But as something her entire system had already started orienting itself around. Avaya met her gaze. Uncertain. Open. Still not fully understanding what she was standing inside of. The world outside roared again. Closer. Final approach. Eridia stepped forward. Not hesitation. Decision. And the distance between them disappeared into something that had already been written long before either of them arrived here. Catherine exhaled softly. Good, she whispered. And as the first breach alarms began to scream through the building, Eridia Dondarrion finally stopped resisting what she had been built to become. And Avaya Reeves stopped being alone in it. Chapter 17. Alignment. The moment did not arrive gently. It arrived like inevitability finally choosing form. Eridia stepped closer to Avaya. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Controlled motion stripped down to its most essential truth. Avaya did not move away. She simply looked up at her. And for once, there was no confusion in her expression. Only something quieter. Something that felt like recognition without language. The building above them groaned under distant rotor pressure. Glass vibrated faintly. Systems screamed warnings that no one inside was listening to anymore. Because something else had taken priority. Something older than protocol. Aradia's voice dropped. Low. Careful. Not command. Not denial. This is not a sanction process. Avaya swallowed lightly. I don't think anything about this is sanctioned, she replied softly. A pause. Then, quieter. But it doesn't feel wrong. That was the fracture point. Not certainty. Not instruction. Permission without fear. Aradia's hand lifted. Hesitated just long enough for restraint to be acknowledged. Then settled lightly at Avaya's wrist. Not gripping. Not holding. Just confirming. Like her system needed physical proof before it could allow what came next. Avaya stepped in, closing the distance herself. Small movement, but decisive in a way neither of them could undo afterward. Aradia's breath broke once. Not collapse. Activation. Something ancient inside her responding like it had been waiting under centuries of silence. And then the kiss happened. Not dramatic. Not performed. Not hesitant. Just contact finally agreeing with what the system had already decided long ago. The world did not explode. It aligned. Something inside Eridia clicked open. Not metaphorically. Structurally. Like every suppressed layer of her being suddenly recognized its missing counterpart. Her breath steadied, then deepened, then shifted entirely. Heat didn't rise. It settled. Into something vast and controlled. Something that no longer belonged to fear or confusion. Avaya pulled back slightly. Just enough to breathe. And in that space between them, it happened. Aradia's eyes changed. Not color first. Presence. Then the shift came fully through. Gold. Not reflection. Not illusion. Activation. The air in the room changed density instantly. Pressure dropped. Then stabilized. Then expanded outward like something waking up inside the building itself. Catherine exhaled once. Quiet. Relieved. "We're in time," she murmured. Above them, the first breach team entered Alpha Core. Armored. Controlled. Confident. They expected resistance. They expected security protocols. They expected systems. They did not expect silence. The moment they crossed the threshold into the inner corridor, everything stopped. Not power failure. Not shutdown. Presence. The air thickened. Not physically visible, but felt immediately. Like stepping into a storm that had already decided you were not welcome. One of the operatives paused. "Do you feel that?" Another nodded slowly. "Atmospheric pressure shift, but there's no weather system active." A third didn't answer at all, because something in their instincts had already begun to retreat. Inside the facility, Aradia lifted her head slightly. Gold eyes now fully settled. Focused. Not on them. Through them. Like they were already accounted for. Already irrelevant. Avaya stood beside her. Still adjusting. Still aware of everything changing too fast to name. But not alone in it anymore. Catherine stepped back slightly. Proud in a way that was almost painful. "Protector," she said quietly. Then softer. Finally. Aradia moved forward. Just one step. And the entire corridor outside seemed to recoil. Not visibly, but instinctively. Like prey recognizing it had walked into the wrong ecosystem. The lead operative signaled. "Target building is unstable, requesting extraction authorization." Static. Then command response. Negative. "Proceed." They hesitated. Just a second too long. And that was enough. Because the air shifted again. Not pressure. Not temperature. Authority. Something that did not need recognition to function. Something that simply was. Aradia's voice carried through the corridor without amplification. But it reached every ear. Calm. Absolute. Controlled in a way that no longer required effort. "You are not authorized to be here." A pause. Then. "Leave." Silence. Because something in the tone made retreat feel like the only rational continuation of survival. One of the operatives stepped back. "We're pulling out," he said quietly. No argument followed. No resistance. Just agreement from instinct. Another turned. The reports didn't account for this level of... He stopped. Because there was no word for it. Inside the chamber, Avaya looked at Aradia. At the gold in her eyes. At the stillness that wasn't absence anymore. It was command without noise. "Is this what you are?" she asked softly. Aradia glanced at her. And for the first time, there was something almost gentle beneath the authority. "This is what we become," she said. A pause. Then quieter. Together. Outside, the final operative withdrew fully from the building. Not because they were ordered to, but because every system in their body had agreed simultaneously, this is not a battle you enter. This is a threshold you respect. The corridor went quiet again. Not empty. Held. And in the center of it all, Aradia Dondarrion stood fully aligned. Protector awakened. Anchor recognized. Gold-eyed and unmovable. Avaya Reeve exhaled softly beside her. No longer alone in the unknown. No longer unmarked by it. And the world outside, for the first time, learned what it felt like to approach something it could no longer take. Chapter 18. Homecoming of the Unnamed Things. The building did not feel like a building anymore. It felt like a system remembering itself. Every corridor, every panel of glass, every silent protocol embedded in Alpha Core's bones had begun to behave differently. Not broken. Rewritten by presence. Aradia stood still. Golden eyes no longer flickering between states. Fully settled. Fully awake. Not consumed by instinct. Defined by it. And for the first time in her life, nothing in her body resisted Omega presence. Because there was no Omega presence anymore. There was only Avaya. She turned slightly toward her. And the realization arrived like something ancient finally speaking aloud inside her skull. Not emotion. Not desire. Resolution. All her life, Omega Scent had been wrong. Not weak. Not offensive. Just incompatible. A biological rejection that no one had ever been able to explain. Now she understood why. They were not incomplete for her. They were misaligned with her structure. Like trying to force light through the wrong prism. Her voice came quieter than before. Not less powerful. More precise. That's why, she said. Avaya looked at her. Still adjusting. Still feeling the aftershock of what had just rewritten her understanding of herself. Why what? She asked softly. Erida stepped closer. Slow. Certain. Not restrained anymore. Aligned. Every scent I ever encountered, she said, recoiled against me. A pause. Not pain. Clarity. Because they were not meant for me. Her gaze softened slightly. Then, none of them were you. Avaya inhaled sharply. Not fear. Recognition landing too deep to immediately hold. And then it happened for her too. Not in thought. In sensation. A settling. Like a lifetime of drifting suddenly finding its correct coordinate. The chaos inside her didn't disappear. It organized. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Her breath steadied. And something in her expression shifted from confusion into something far quieter. Relief. I've always felt like I was arriving late to something I couldn't see, she whispered. A pause. Then she looked up at Erida fully. But this. A soft breath. This feels like I'm finally where I was meant to be. Erida did not move for a moment. Because that sentence did something no system, no protocol, no architecture in her world had ever done. It made everything inside her go still in agreement. Catherine watched them from the side of the room. And for the first time since the alignment began, she exhaled like someone who had been holding an entire era in her lungs. Yes, she said quietly. That is what home feels like when it remembers you. A distant tremor moved through the building. Not attack. Not breach. Reaction. The world outside, still trying to interpret what it had just witnessed and failing to classify it fast enough to matter. But inside, nothing was uncertain anymore. Erida lifted her hand slowly. Not toward control. Toward recognition. Her fingers stopped just short of Avaya's shoulder. Not hesitation. Respect for the moment's final threshold. Avaya stepped in again, closing it herself. This time without uncertainty. Without question. As if something inside her had finally stopped waiting for permission to exist. Contact. Not explosive. Not overwhelming. Correct. Aradia's breath deepened. And something in her chest that had been rigid for years finally loosened, not breaking, not collapsing, integrating. Gold light in her eyes steadied. Not flaring. Settling. Like a storm becoming climate. I understand now, Erida said quietly. A pause. Then. I was never meant to be untouched by Omega presence. Avaya looked up at her. Softly. Then what were you meant to be? Erida didn't hesitate. Not anymore. Complete, she said. The word didn't echo. It resolved. Like a chord finally reaching its intended note after centuries of silence. Avaya's eyes softened. And she let out a small breath that almost sounded like laughter. Good, she whispered. Because I was starting to think I was the only one who didn't feel broken in this place. Aradia's expression shifted slightly. Not smile. Something quieter. Recognition with warmth now attached to it. You were never broken, she said. A pause. You were displaced. Catherine stepped forward slowly. And placed a hand gently between them, not separating, but grounding. You are what the system forgot how to protect properly, she said. A pause. And what it forgot how to recognize when it finally returned. The lights in the building steadied. The alarms outside faded into irrelevant background noise. The northern presence paused. Not retreating yet, but reconsidering everything they thought they knew. Because something had changed. Not in power. Not in force. In definition. Erida looked at Avaya again. Not like discovery. Not like obligation. Like return. And Avaya looked back. Like she had finally stopped searching for something she didn't know she was already carrying home. And in that silence between them, the world finally understood. They were not two entities meeting. They were one system remembering its missing half. Chapter 19. Calibration Errors. The silence that followed the alignment wasn't fragile anymore. It was settled. Like the world had finally stopped pretending it didn't know what it was doing. Aradia stood still, golden gaze softened at the edges now, as if even her system had learned it didn't need to stay on full defensive architecture. Avaya, on the other hand, looked entirely too satisfied for someone who had just rewritten reality. She tilted her head at Aradia. Slow. Measuring. Like she was inspecting a very expensive, very dangerous piece of equipment that had just successfully powered on. Then she smiled. Small. Dangerously amused. I think, Avaya said thoughtfully, we need to make sure the alignment was properly calibrated. Aradia blinked once. That is not how alignment works. Avaya nodded like she had heard her, considered it, and rejected it immediately. Then she stepped closer. Aradia's posture shifted instinctively. Not defensive. Just alert. Too many years of being the most powerful thing in a room made proximity a language she never fully relaxed into. Avaya stopped right in front of her. Looked up. Very calmly. Very deliberately. I'm just saying, Avaya continued, if we're going to rewrite biological destiny and destabilize northern surveillance grids, we should probably double-check the results. Aradia narrowed her eyes slightly. That is not a recognized protocol. Avaya hummed. No? Then she reached up. Lightly caught the front of Aradia's coat. And pulled. It wasn't forceful. It was confident. Like she had decided gravity was optional now. Aradia moved forward automatically, just enough to keep balance. And stopped. Exactly where Avaya wanted her. Avaya tilted her head again. That same small, familiar gesture. The one that had undone every system Aradia had ever built around restraint. Let's test it properly, she said. Aradia opened her mouth to respond. Something technical. Something controlled. Something safe. She didn't get the chance. Avaya pulled her down. This time the kiss wasn't activation. It wasn't alignment. It was confirmation. Slow at first, then unashamedly deeper, like Avaya had decided scientific caution was overrated and emotional curiosity was more fun. Aradia froze for half a second, then stopped freezing entirely. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a very offended internal system tried to file a complaint. It was ignored. Immediately. When they finally broke apart, it was not sudden. Just necessary. Like oxygen had become relevant again. Avaya was smiling. Aradia was not. Not because she was unhappy. Because she was recalculating 17 entirely new definitions of acceptable behavior and failing all of them at once. Avaya glanced at her. You look like your internal firewall is crying. Aradia blinked. My what? Avaya shrugged lightly. I'm guessing. Behind them, Catherine cleared her throat. Not loudly. Just enough to remind reality she was still present. Aradia turned slowly. Looked at her mother. Still composed. Still trying to restore order in a universe that had clearly stopped asking for it. Then she asked, very calmly. Was it Avaya's voice that broke the fog over your mind? Catherine considered this. Long enough to be suspicious. Then nodded once. Yes. A pause. Then, with absolute sincerity. And I suspect she is going to be a long-term system override. Avaya raised a hand slightly. Excuse me, what does that mean exactly? Catherine smiled faintly. It means, she said, you are the only person I have ever seen successfully uninstall Aradia's emotional suppression architecture without permission. Aradia slowly turned her head back toward Avaya. That is not an installed architecture. Avaya looked at her. Smiled again. Sure. Beat. Tell that to your face. Aradia paused. Then very quietly. My face appears to be malfunctioning. Catherine let out a soft sound that might have been laughter, if laughter had ever been allowed in her life for long. Avaya, meanwhile, looked entirely too pleased with herself. Outside the facility, distant systems continued to shift. Northern forces recalibrating, searching, failing, recalculating again. Because nothing in their models accounted for an anchor who laughed while rewriting the world. Inside the room, Erida exhaled slowly, then looked at Avaya again. We may need to review interaction protocols. Avaya tilted her head. After. Erida paused. After. And for the first time in a very long time, Erida Dondarrion allowed something dangerously close to amusement to exist in her system. Not as error, but as part of the alignment. Chapter 20, where the world learns to breathe again. The northern factions did not return that night. Not because they were defeated in a conventional sense, but because every system they brought with them had returned one unified report. Unclassifiable threat condition, withdrawal advised. And no one liked what that meant enough to test it twice. So, they left the sky alone. For now, Alpha Core did not announce anything. It didn't need to. But every corridor felt slightly recalibrated the next morning, like the building itself had stopped pretending it was just architecture. And in the highest glass chamber of it all, Erida Dondarrion stood by the window. Still, watching the city that no longer felt separate from her. Not because she controlled it, but because it no longer felt like something she had to defend from misunderstanding herself. Behind her, Avaya was barefoot on the polished floor, sitting on the edge of a desk she absolutely should not have been sitting on. Reading something from an old archive slate. Humming softly. Like she belonged there in a way no protocol could argue with. Erida didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. I have revised security protocols, she said. Avaya didn't look up. That sounds ominous. It is preventative. MHM. Pause. Does it involve me being followed again? Yes. Avaya finally looked up. Smiled. Of course it does. Erida turned then. Slow. Controlled. But not distant. Never distant anymore. You are still classified as a protected asset, she said. Avaya raised an eyebrow. I feel very classified. Erida stepped closer. That classification is permanent. Avaya tilted her head. So, I can't resign? A pause. Erida considered this with absolute seriousness. No. Avaya nodded. Good. I like my job security. Silence settled again. But this one wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. Like the world had finally stopped interrupting them. Erida reached her. Not abrupt. Not uncertain. Just present. Her hand settled lightly at Avaya's waist, like she was still learning that closeness didn't require emergency protocols anymore. Avaya didn't move away. Instead, she leaned in. Like she had decided proximity was her favorite language now. You're calmer, Avaya murmured. Erida exhaled slightly. I am regulated. Avaya smiled. That's a very boring word for what you are. Erida's gaze softened. What am I? Avaya stepped closer again. Close enough that Erida didn't need to recalibrate anything anymore. Mine, she said simply. Like it was obvious. Like it had always been. Erida didn't respond immediately. Not because she disagreed. Because her system briefly forgot how to translate anything that wasn't acceptance. Then, quietly. That is not a recognized classification. Avaya hummed. We'll fix your database later. And then she kissed her. Not like alignment. Not like awakening. Like home continuing itself without needing permission. This time Erida didn't freeze. Didn't calculate. Didn't correct. She simply returned it. With everything she had once called control, and everything she now understood as recognition. When they finally parted, it was slow. Unrushed. Unnecessary to end, but chosen anyway. Because even infinity benefits from breath. Avaya rested her forehead lightly against Erida's. So, she whispered, this is what you do when you're not trying to control the entire world. Erida's voice was softer now. I believe I still am. Avaya smiled against her. Yeah, Yes. Pause. But now I have you. Outside, the city moved. Unaware. Or pretending to be. But something in it had changed anyway. Something subtle. Like gravity remembering it had always had more than one center. And in the glass fortress above it all, Aradia Dondarrion no longer stood alone at the axis of power. She stood at one half of it. And Avaya Reeve, the anchor who had never needed to be found, was finally no longer orbiting anything that did not recognize her as home. And for the first time in Kasiran's recorded history, the system did not fear balance. It settled into it. Chapter 21. The Light That Refuses to Be Archived. Alpha Core had a language for everything. Risk. Asset. Threat. Asset class override. Containment priority. It did not, however, have a term for Avaya Reeve laughing in the archive corridor while security teams recalibrated their entire perception grid because she had moved a document 2 shelves to the left and somehow improved system efficiency by 4%. Elian tried. She really did. But eventually she just wrote. Subject introduces nonlinear optimization via proximity presence. And stopped there. Because anything more honest would have required emotional vocabulary. Aradia read the report without reacting. Outwardly. Internally, however, her empire had begun doing something deeply unsettling. It was adapting around Avaya's presence without being told to. Department heads reported. Improved communication clarity in Avaya's vicinity. Reduced conflict response times near her route. Increased morale in Omega-tier staff after brief incidental interaction. One beta analyst wrote. She feels like sunlight that accidentally fixes things. Elian did not forward that one. She should have. But she didn't want Aradia to see it phrased like that. Aradia, of course, saw it anyway. Because Avaya had a habit of appearing wherever she was not supposed to be and leaving traces of improvement like stray stars. Meanwhile, Avaya Reeve unintentional system anomaly. Avaya had learned 3 things very quickly. 1. Nobody in Alpha Core knew how to tell her no in a way she believed. 2. Everything broke slightly less when she was in the room. 3. Aradia Dondarrion pretended not to watch her approximately 87% of the time. The other 13% was less subtle. She was in archives again when she found it. Not hidden this time. Not buried. But sealed. A sublayer beneath Anchor records marked. Reeve lineage. Primary containment era. Avaya frowned. That sounds illegal, she muttered. The system did not respond. Which was answer enough. She bypassed it. Not hacking. Not force. Just asking it the right question in the right tone. The system opened like it recognized her voice. And suddenly, history breathed. Her parents didn't disappear her from the system. They rewrote her relationship to detection itself. Anchor signature suppression wasn't removal. It was inversion. Every time she had been near a resonance scan, the system had recorded absence instead of presence. Not invisible. Misregistered as non-applicable reality. Avaya leaned back slightly. That is extremely dramatic, she whispered. Then softer. And kind of impressive. Behind her, Aradia's voice came from the doorway. Your lineage is classified as existential countermeasure architecture. A pause. That is not a compliment. Avaya turned. Smiling. It kind of feels like one though. Aradia stepped in. Watching her like she still wasn't fully used to the fact that Avaya made rooms feel less hostile. Not safer. Just less sharp. You are not supposed to be readable, Aradia said. Avaya tilted her head. Yet here I am. A beat. Being read. Aradia's gaze softened fractionally. That shift still happens sometimes, small, almost imperceptible, like her system briefly forgetting it was built from restraint. You are destabilizing operational language across 3 departments, Aradia said. Avaya blinked. Is that bad? A pause. Aradia considered. Then. No. Another pause. It is efficient. Avaya smiled like she had just won an argument she didn't know she was in. Good. Empire adjustment event. Aradia Dondarrion. The next meeting changed tone before Aradia even entered. Because people had started noticing something alarming, she had stopped walking like she was above everything, and started walking like she was returning to something between stops. The boardroom rose automatically, then hesitated, because Avaya walked in behind her, carrying nothing, smiling at no one in particular, and somehow making the room feel less like a tribunal and more like a space that had forgotten it could breathe. An Alpha executive attempted formal report language. It lasted 3 sentences. Avaya tilted her head slightly and said, "I think you're overcomplicating fear-based forecasting." He stopped speaking entirely. Did not resume. Elian quietly wrote in her notes, "Subject produces spontaneous de-escalation effects in high-authority environments." Then added beneath it, "Also, HR is confused." Aradia, at the head of the table, did not correct any of it. That was the most shocking part. Because she had started doing something worse for an empire, she had started allowing softness to remain in the room. Not weakness. Not disorder. Just Avaya. Later, Glass Fortress evening. The city below moved like it always did, unaware it had a new gravitational anomaly living above it. Avaya leaned against the glass, watching lights blink across Kasairan. "I think your empire is getting used to me," she said. Aradia stood behind her. "That is a problem." Avaya smiled. "Is it?" A pause. "It is unregulated." Avaya turned slightly. Aradia. "Yes. You just said unregulated like it's a swear word." Silence. Then, "It is sometimes functionally equivalent." Avaya laughed. Quiet. Warm. And something in Aradia's system did not classify that sound. It simply stabilized around it. She stepped closer. Not possessive. Not cautious. Just present. And when Avaya leaned back into her without hesitation, it didn't trigger protocol. It triggered recognition. "You are affecting operational cohesion," Aradia murmured. Avaya tilted her head up slightly. "Am I?" A pause. "Yes." Avaya smiled softly. "Good." Because neither of them said it yet, but the truth was already forming in the architecture of everything around them. Aradia's empire was not being disrupted. It was being humanized around an anchor it never knew it needed. And Aradia herself was no longer the most dangerous constant in the room. She was the one learning how to orbit something that made her better just by existing near her. And that was the real shift. Not power. Not alignment. But light becoming structural. Chapter 22. The Bloom of Kasairan. The facility was quieter this time. Not because it had changed. Because they had. Catherine Dondarrion sat exactly where she always did. Like time had learned not to argue with her anymore. She looked at Aradia. Then at Avaya. Then sighed with the kind of satisfaction only a woman who has successfully restarted an extinct lineage could carry without apology. "Well," Catherine said, folding her hands, "I suppose I should ask." A pause. Then, far too casually, "Grandchildren?" Avaya blinked slowly. "Excuse me." Aradia didn't move, but something in her expression recalculated reality. Once. Twice. Then decided this was, in fact, happening. Catherine continued, undeterred. "I am 70. I would like to see at least one chaotic continuation of this genetic miracle before I become a historical footnote." Avaya slowly turned her head toward Aradia. Very quietly. "Is she serious?" Aradia's response was immediate. Too immediate. "Yes." A beat. Then, because honesty was now something she no longer filtered by protocol. "Unfortunately." Avaya looked back at Catherine. "You do realize that's not how any of this works, right?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "My dear," she said, "you are currently standing next to a woman whose emotional regulation architecture once destabilized an entire surveillance network because you tilted your head while breathing." A pause. "I think we've already abandoned how things work." Avaya exhaled slowly. "Fair. Annoyingly fair." Aradia stepped slightly forward. Not defensive. Just precise. There are significant variables, she said calmly. The combination of anchor and protector lineages introduces unpredictable systemic variance. Catherine nodded. Yes, Aridia continued. It would be irresponsible to introduce additional unregulated genetic output into a stabilizing system. Avaya stared at her. You just called a baby unregulated genetic output. Aridia blinked once. It is technically accurate. Catherine pressed her lips together, trying very hard not to laugh. Failing slightly. Avaya crossed her arms. So your argument is, don't have children because they might be powerful anomalies? Aridia paused. Then, very carefully. That is one interpretation. Avaya tilted her head. You're adorable when you try to sound like a government report. Aridia did not respond immediately, because somewhere in her internal system, that statement had been flagged as both incorrect and uncomfortably pleasant. Catherine leaned back slightly. Oh, I like her, she said. Avaya pointed at her. You don't get to encourage her. Catherine smiled. I get to encourage anything that survives my daughter. Aridia finally spoke again. Calm. Controlled. But with a faint edge of something that might have been amusement trying to pass through protocol. You are suggesting increased anomaly propagation. Catherine nodded. Yes. A pause. Then added lightly. It would be evolutionally consistent. Avaya rubbed her forehead. I feel like I walked into a meeting I didn't consent to. Aridia glanced at her. You did. Silence. Then, Avaya sighed. Okay. Hypothetically. Catherine perked up instantly. Aridia did not. Aridia looked mildly alarmed. Avaya continued. If we did introduce unregulated output. Aridia interrupted immediately. That is not the correct terminology. Avaya raised a hand. Into the system, she finished. Aridia stopped. Waited. Avaya looked between them both. Would the world survive it? Catherine answered first. Oh, absolutely not. Then smiled. But it would be interesting. Aridia exhaled slowly. That is not a sufficient safety metric. Catherine shrugged. Neither is anything you've ever built. A pause. Then Aridia turned slightly toward Avaya. Very quietly. Are you considering this? Avaya looked at her. Long enough for Aradia's internal systems to briefly consider emergency recalibration protocols. Then Avaya smiled. Soft. Warm. Dangerously calm. I'm considering, she said, that your mother is terrifyingly enthusiastic about chaos. Catherine raised a hand. Accurate. Avaya stepped closer to Aridia. Not teasing now. Something gentler under it. And I'm considering, she added quietly, that maybe the world already survived the worst version of us being alone. A pause. Then softer. Maybe it can handle whatever comes after. Aridia looked at her. And for once, there was no analysis trying to interrupt the moment. Just understanding. That is not a guarantee, she said quietly. Avaya smiled. No. A beat. It's a risk. Silence again. But different now. Not tension. Possibility. Catherine leaned back in her chair, utterly satisfied. Well, she said. I've done my part. The rest is your unregulated problem now. Aridia slowly turned her head toward her mother. You are aware you are encouraging systemic instability. Catherine nodded. Yes. A pause. Then, with absolute calm. I raised you. That ended the argument. Immediately. Avaya laughed under her breath. Aridia looked at her. Then very quietly said, You are both dangerous. Avaya smiled. Yeah, she said. Now you get it. And for the first time in the history of Kasairan's most powerful system, Aridia Dondarrion did not classify that as a threat. She classified it as home. Epilogue: Unregulated Futures. The years of living in a vacuum had left the Dondarrion mansion cold, but today, the east wings smelled of jasmine, sun-warm skin, and the faint, permanent scent of a life shared. The glass fortress on the hill had been renamed the Sanctuary, and the walls that once served as barriers were now merely frames for the breathtaking view of a united Kasirun. The world outside had shifted. The archive was no longer a secret ledger, but a public curriculum. The North had stabilized, not through force, but through the export of anchors, men and women who, like Avaya, carried the frequency of peace. But inside the master suite, the world of politics and legacies felt 1,000 miles away. The sun was setting, casting long, honey-colored bars of light across the expansive bed. Aradia stood by the window, her silhouette softened by the twilight. She wasn't the iron-jawed CEO. She was a woman whose eyes only glowed now when she looked at the person who had saved her. Avaya approached her from behind, sliding her arms around Aradia's waist. She felt the Alpha's muscles relax instantly at her touch, a reflexive surrender that still made Avaya's heart skip. The gala was long. Avaya whispered, pressing a kiss between Aradia's shoulder blades. You look like you're still carrying the weight of the council on your shoulders. Aradia turned in the circle of Avaya's arms, her hands coming up to cradle Avaya's face. The silver-gold light in her irises was a low, steady ember, radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. The council is fine, Aradia murmured, her voice a deep, private vibration. I was just thinking about the first time I felt you in that garden. How terrified I was that the scent of you would break me. And did it? Avaya teased, her fingers tracing the sharp line of Aradia's jaw. It broke everything I thought I was, Aradia admitted, leaning down until their foreheads touched. And left me with everything I actually needed. Aradia swept Avaya up into her arms, the movement effortless and possessive, and carried her to the bed. As they sank into the soft linens, the last of the city's noise faded away. The intimacy between them was no longer a frantic struggle. It was a slow, deliberate exploration. Aradia moved with a reverence that bordered on worship, her hands mapping the curves of Avaya's body as if memorizing a sacred text. Every touch from Avaya was an anchor, keeping Aradia's immense alpha strength tethered to the present, turning power into tenderness. When Aradia buried her face in the crook of Avaya's neck, she didn't inhale out of desperation. She breathed in with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew she was home. The scent of lavender and rain was the heartbeat of her world. You're my anchor, Aradia breathed against her skin, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide. Always. And you're my protector, Avaya replied, her eyes locking onto Aradia's as they moved together in the fading light. Always. In the quiet of the room, as the stars began to claim the sky over the first arc, the legacy of the anchor was written in the simplest of ways, in the steady rhythm of two hearts beating in perfect, unforced harmony. The glass had shattered, the vacuum was full, and for Aradia Dondarrion, the silence was finally, beautifully over.